It's mostly just like if my siblings are home and they're streaming stuff, then we usually don't have enough for multiple people and it'll cut out. Or like during COVID when they were trying to do their Zooms while I was trying to do mine, we'd have to choose who could be on.
That was Piper Simons, a senior at Hurley High School in Hurley, Wisconsin. Hurley is a small city in northern Wisconsin and borders the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Her and her family's experience is not that different from much of the rest of the rural population in Wisconsin. Multiple people using one home internet connection can pose a lot of trouble in rural areas that lack the proper infrastructure. And this is where grant money for building infrastructure like fiber optic cabling, fixed wireless, and other types of internet connections comes into play. Over the past 6 years, Wisconsin received money from the Connect America Fund through the FCC, the state's own Broadband Expansion Grant Program, and more recently the CARES Act for pandemic-related aid. These types of aid are generally for vastly rural, underserved, or unserved areas of the state to build and update internet infrastructure. The grants have increased year to year. For example, the state spent $20 million total from 2014 to 2019. In 2014 and 2015 combined, less than $1 million was awarded. 2018 and 2019 combined for over $14.5 million in expansion grant money. Going into 2021, $24 million has been made available to help extend broadband to unserved areas of Wisconsin. Governor Tony Evers signed an order in 2020 creating the Governor's Task Force on Broadband Access. The task force was created to, quote, advise the state legislature on broadband actions and policy, initiatives for digital inclusion, and pathways to unlocking and optimizing the benefits of statewide, affordable access to broadband for all communities in Wisconsin, unquote. That is according to the Wisconsin Broadband Office. I say this to show that there are institutional efforts fighting to spread broadband throughout the state. Money is being spent on broadband. You can argue about the amount, but money is being used to develop internet infrastructure. Regardless of this fact, from my research, it is apparent that communities should not do nothing and wait around for these grants to be applied. There are a couple of reasons for this. First, even when the grants do come around, there's no guarantee that broadband projects will be done on time or even to the effect that they are pledged. For example, AT&T in FCC regulatory filings last year admitted falsely reporting having provided home internet service in nearly 3,600 census blocks across parts of 20 states, including Wisconsin. CenturyLink notified the FCC that it, quote, may not have reached the deployment milestone, unquote, in 23 states and that it hit the latest deadline in only 10 states. Frontier similarly notified the FCC that it, quote, may not have met, unquote, the requirements in 13 states. The second reason communities should not wait around for these grants is that there are so many other things that they could be doing to organize committees on the issue, raise money themselves, educate themselves on the problem and how other communities are resolving it. There's a lot to be done. Bernadine Jocelyn, the Director of Public Policy and Engagement at the Blandin Foundation, echoes this sentiment. I contacted her for an interview, and during it, she talked with me about how local leaders and communities have to step up and accept their responsibility. She said this is not to criticize or condemn these communities, but to highlight the fact that the likelihood of them being saved by a generous internet service provider is relatively low. Jocelyn referenced an organization called RS Fiber that is succeeding in its independence-based model for developing community broadband. RS Fiber is a fiber optic cooperative in central Minnesota that began building its network in 2015. The cooperative has since built an impressive fiber-to-the-home network to benefit farmers and rural residents in Renville, Nicollet, and McLeod counties. This is an aggressive project, and when it is complete, it is expected to have cost $45 million, connected more than 6,000 households, and covered more than 700 square miles. The Institute for Local Self-Reliance, or ILSR, has a broadband initiative that assists communities with similar projects. It has 3 main offices, one in Washington, D.C., one in Portland, Maine, and one in Minneapolis, Minnesota. During an interview with Christopher Mitchell, the director of the Community Broadband Networks Initiative with ILSR, we discussed why local communities aren't stepping up, especially during the pandemic. Lack of knowledge and research seem to be the issue.
So I feel like if you're an elected representative and you don't really have much technical background, you're looking at this problem and thinking, I don't know much about how the internet works, and I'm seeing reports that suggest cities make big mistakes when they try to solve it, so maybe I'll just hope it goes away.
Yeah,
that's what I think we see.
It takes a big education effort by elected leaders to understand what problems they're trying to solve, how they're going to do it, and how they're going to measure if they were successful in doing it after the fact. Finding the correct information through deep research was a common theme I found throughout my reporting. I mean, it makes sense. You can't organize around an issue unless you know exactly what that issue is and which communities it affects the most. I talked with Anna Reed, a research officer with the Pew Charitable Trust. Her Broadband Initiative project emphasizes research to inform policy that will advance access to broadband. The National Research Organization has been looking all over the country at state activity to address gaps in broadband access. It has identified a set of practices across states in different phases of development and states with varying levels of funding that progress these areas toward closing gaps. Such practices include engaging stakeholders at both the state and local levels, addressing policy barriers, creating a policy framework for deploying broadband, providing support for planning or technical assistance, and then funding and evaluating and determining next steps. Communities that are doing these things on a regular basis are putting themselves in the best positions to receive grants and effectively deploy them. They are also creating a culture that values broadband, which is good for philanthropy and fundraising, of course, but at a different level, a deeper level, a community that knows what it wants and maybe even how to get it can work as a whole to organize around that effort. Now that I have given you an idea of the bigger picture problem many rural communities face, I want to show you what individuals in these communities deal with on a daily basis. I interviewed at least a dozen rural residents of Wisconsin to understand how lack of quality internet access impacts their lives. Lauren Bushman is a Marquette student in her junior year from Bevent, Wisconsin, a rural town in Marathon County. The population was 1,101 in 2018, according to the census. As rural of a town as this might seem, her internet service wasn't the main issue. You know, it wasn't perfect. It would go out during storms, and whenever a call was received on the landline, the internet would often go out. It would come back in a few minutes, but it would still be very disruptive. Though, when the internet did completely go out, it would take up to 4 days to get a technician to her house. Long repair wait times. This is a common theme in rural areas. Her main gripe was with her cell service.
Cell service is horrible.
Okay.
And this year especially, it's been the worst ever. We use Cellcom, it's called, or at least that's what I use. It's supposed to be better in rural areas, but lately, now that I've been in Milwaukee, I'll have times where once I'm off Wi-Fi, I can't make a phone call, I can't send a text, I can't map anything. So I just basically have an iPod.
Joanna Friedrich is an English teacher in her 20th year at Wittenberg-Burnham High School in Wittenberg, Wisconsin. Her Wi-Fi is decent, but not always reliable. As a teacher, she has to deal with internet issues in her own home, as well as her students' homes. Sometimes she receives texts from her students saying they cannot access or complete the assignment due to poor Wi-Fi. Most of the area's fixed wireless comes from a local phone company in town. During the pandemic, it has been especially tough to upload assignments for class. Joanna mentioned that there were a lot of times when things just wouldn't upload or download all day. Then she'd have to wake up at 2 a.m. and do it when hopefully nobody was using the internet in town. Joanna had this to say on what students miss with virtual learning and poor internet.
It takes a lot away by not having in-person instruction, but it also takes more away when the technology that you do have doesn't lend itself well to what you're even trying to do in a makeshift model.
Neil Clem is the 4-H youth development educator in Hurley, Wisconsin, and president of the group NICER. That is the Northern Iron County Engaged Residents Group. During our interview, he told me that 4-H is a very much hands-on program. So the challenge of teaching kids how to handle animals or how to cook online doesn't always work. He wants to do more online, but due to greatly differing Wi-Fi situations depending on location, it would be difficult to guarantee that every kid who is participating would be getting the same thing.
We're rural remote is how I describe it to people. We're 2 hours from Wausau. We're 2 hours from Duluth. We got, we've got Ironwood here, but Ironwood doesn't have all that much either. And,
No.
So it's a 2-hour drive for school shopping every year. It's so, when it gets to, comparing rural communities, ours has some challenges that other communities don't have as well.
Piper Simons is a senior at Hurley High and is also in the 4-H program along with Neil. She talked with me about how she lives in town, so therefore she counts herself as one of the lucky ones regarding internet access. Even so, she still has trouble with doing homework online due to having other siblings trying to do the same thing.
It's mostly just like if my siblings are home and they're streaming stuff, then we usually don't have enough for multiple people and it'll cut out. Or like during COVID, when they were trying to do their Zooms while I was trying to do mine, we'd have to choose who could be on.
Mackenzie Backman is a senior at Hurley High and friends with Piper. She's in the 4-H program as well. Mackenzie doesn't live in the city and says her internet is slower than dirt. She can't even get Netflix and can barely do a FaceTime or a Zoom call. With multiple people on the internet at once in her household, it's almost unusable. Moreover, Mackenzie has some learning disabilities that make online learning quite difficult.
Because one thing, I'm a hands-on learner because I have some different types of disabilities and everything. So it makes it harder for me to learn online because I can't a teacher can't come up and physically help me and examine what I'm actually doing wrong. For instance, algebra or math or anything to deal with that, it would be super hard because they couldn't really see it. And then I'd have to wait for my email to send, which would probably take 15 minutes. And then I would be able to finally ask them a question.
Julie Nelson is a Peshtigo Elementary School teacher that has learned various tips and tricks for maximizing internet access quality over the past few months. Her husband is also a teacher at the same school, and both of their children are students there. The family has had internet through HughesNet for the past few years, but it was so slow it never really paid for itself. They eventually left HughesNet and solely relied on cellular data in the form of a hotspot for their laptops. When the pandemic hit in March of 2020 and all 4 members of the family were either working or learning from home, the cellular data wasn't good enough, even though it was an unlimited plan. So they got a cell phone booster.
And we had to kind of rig it up on a pole on our patio as high as we could get it. And that increased our cell phone signal. So we got a stronger signal, and then we were able to have things download a little bit faster. But of course, still ate away at our data.
At times when they needed, they went to the school parking lot to use its Wi-Fi.
We could go to our district, to our school where we work, and as long as they allowed us in the building, we could do that. Otherwise, we parked in the parking lot where there was a signal, and we tried to do some of our work that way because the school's network is much faster than even the cell booster that we tried rigging up at our house.
The cell booster is still up on the pole as it is their best option, and they have been doing a little better with the internet since their school opened for in-person classes in the fall of 2020. Esther Tarasinski is a Marquette University student in her junior year. She is from Newton, Wisconsin, and Manitowoc County. Her area has one local provider, which only provided dial-up service until just a few years ago. But things have changed for the better. She recalls as a kid logging onto Webkinz wanting to play, and it would take her and her sister 2 hours just to feed their animals. Her family now pays more to have significantly faster internet, but it still goes down and is often unreliable. In rural areas, families are often left to fix internet problems by themselves due to slow troubleshooting service. This can be devastating, especially to small business owners like Esther's family. They own a banquet hall, so internet service is heavily relied upon.
One time, I don't remember what part of the internet went out, but it just wasn't working. And it was past what my family could fix, nothing that unplugging and replugging the router would do. Yeah. And it took, I think, about a week for anyone to come out. And they were really fighting even bringing anybody out because that's, resources that they don't want to provide unless absolutely necessary.
Matt Rederath is a biology teacher at Kashmir Pulaski High School here in Milwaukee. Even in urban settings, quality internet access can be elusive, usually due to financial problems. Multi-generational families and households with many children have some of the biggest obstacles when it comes to virtual learning. The average number of siblings Matt's students have is 5, some having 9 or even 11. Matt constantly deals with internet-related problems while teaching his classes via Google Meets. He said he worries that students aren't getting the same experience out of his classes. Staying in the class sessions can be technologically difficult.
Yes, a lot of them, like, they're missing information when they're dropping those meets. They're missing when I say, here's the link to the test. Like, just the sheer fact that when I give a link to a test and only 100 of my 200 students pick up that link and do something with it,
Wow.
like, is partially a result of this poor internet connection.
As I said, those were some of the more interesting interviews that help paint a picture of what some people in rural Wisconsin deal with on a daily basis. This concludes the Rural Broadband Issue Podcast.